All right. Thank you so much. Welcome to an episode of the Love, Hope, Lyme podcast. This is a special bonus. We just did a show with Dr. Bill Rawls, and we talked about herbs and a lot of the discovery that he published in his book, The Cellular Wellness Solution. Dr. Rawls, I posed the fact that I was going to have you on the Love, Hope, Lyme podcast in one of the more popular Facebook groups on Lyme disease. And we got a lot of questions that people had for you that we didn't get a chance to address in your Love, Hope, Lyme episode. So we're going to do a special episode right now. Once again, I want to remind people, my name is Fred Diamond. I'm the author of Love, Hope, Lyme, What Family Members, Partners, and Friends who love a chronic Lyme survivor need to know. You could listen to this on Apple Podcasts. If you're listening to the show, please give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate it. If you're watching this on YouTube, go give us a thumbs up, leave a question or a comment. We'd appreciate that as well. And just as a reminder, the book is available. My book and Dr. Rawls' book is available on Amazon. The PDF of my book, Love, Hope, Lyme, has always been available for free to chronic Lyme survivors. Reach out to me on Facebook or LinkedIn. I encourage people, go back and listen to the episode that we posted talking about herbals and all the pathways to cellular health. It was a fascinating show. It's a show I have been wanting to do for a long time. But like I said, Dr. Rawls, we got about a dozen questions. We got more. We actually got like 30 questions that people wanted me to ask you. So I just kind of pared it down to about a dozen or so. And you've very kindly offered to address them all. Okay, you ready?
All right, let's go.
It's great to see you here again. Thank you so much for coming back on the Love, Hope, Lyme podcast. All right, let's just kind of go through these. All right, ask Dr. Rawls for his thoughts on ivermectin in the treatment of chronic Lyme, IV. What are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, ivermectin is really a parasite drug for the gut, and it popped up with long COVID, and now it's come back to Lyme. Seems like when there's so many things that are newer, our newer antibiotics don't work, and instead of turning to herbs, people are turning to old drugs like ivermectin and disulfiram, and lately dapsone, and these things have been around forever. And so ivermectin, so when you look at antibiotics, and I won't get too deep, but it's an interesting discussion here. So when we make an antibiotic, I think everybody has this idea that there's smart guys in a lab that are thinking up chemicals to target and kill microbes. And it's like, nah, we're just not that good. All antibiotics come from either a bacteria, a fungus, or a plant, every single one of them. And so all organisms have to defend themselves from microbes, including other bacteria. And so we're not taking that organism's defense system, like we had talked about with the whole herbs defense system. We're pulling a chemical from it. Why do we do that? One, we're not smart enough to reproduce that organism's defense system. And two, we need to get a patent on it because you can't patent natural substances. So we take that chemical, potentiate it or author it chemically, and then we can get a patent, and then we can get all the money we invested on bringing that drug to market. So ivermectin came from a bacteria that was found. It's a soil bacteria that they found on a golf course in Japan. Isn't that an interesting thing? So they take that chemical and then they start exposing stuff to it. Let's expose viruses and bacteria and see what sticks, see what actually works. What does it kill, And they found that it was really good for parasites, okay as an antibacterial, okay as an antiviral. So it has some other properties, but it was mainly good for parasites. So that's how they marketed the drug. So now it's off label. Of course, it's generic. It's not that expensive. It's used in other animals. And it works pretty good for parasites. It's still a good drug. But people have started using it first for COVID, had a little bit of activity, not as good as the herbs, and now they're using it for Lyme. You run into the same effects that any antibiotics. It's a single chemical agent. It works fair for bacteria at best. I think the herbs work a lot better, and you don't get all the other effects of the herbs. So it's like, why waste your time with that?
That's a great. You actually in the previous episode, you went very deep into uh, what the herbs are intended to do versus most of these um, uh, items like the antibiotics, which really are singular focused. And you gave a really good answer on the previous show about what can happen when you get too deep with the antibiotics. All right, we have a question. I don't know exactly how to pronounce it. Is it Morgellons or Morgellons? So
I've heard it both ways. Yeah.
okay. So people said, please ask him about what we could be doing. There's a lot of ties to people with Lyme disease as well. Again, Morgellons, there's sores, itching, hair
Yeah.
loss, tetanus, etc. What are some of your thoughts?
I've studied it deeply, and there's no doubt that there are bacteria at play, and it probably isn't just Borrelia. There are probably other bacteria too, and basically, you're reconstructing an environment that favors the bacteria, and so people end up with filaments in their skin and all kinds of odd things. And so, skin is a place with collagen. That's a great place for Borrelia to hang out because that's its food. And so it's not surprising that we see this. It's not very common, though. So, and it is very, very frustrating to the people that have it. So I think it's really important to really focus on overall health by taking herbs, enhancing diet, reducing toxins, getting sleep, all of these things that we talk about, but then treating it locally. The only limitation I have is that, it's not very common. It's just you don't see it all the time. I've talked to a few individuals here and there that have it. But one thing that I would strongly suggest trying, and I've recommended this to people and gotten some feedback that they had improvement as far as the local skin lesions. Besides taking all the herbs like you would be treating chronic Lyme, there's something called Sangre de Grotto, dragon's blood. And this is a tree that I believe was originally from Malaysia, but it grows all over South America now. And the sap of the tree is bright red, and they bottle it. And you can buy bottles. It's not expensive. It's like $20. But you can apply that in any lesion. Like you get a you get a burn, or you scrape your hand or something like that, or get a cut on your hand. You apply to the dragon's blood, and it dries, it seals the wound, and sterilizes it immediately, and it heals like unbelievably well. So I would recommend. I mean, it's a low risk thing. I would recommend getting a bottle of dragon's blood and trying applying that. There are also some essential oils that you could use, like tea tree oil or neem oil that aren't quite so toxic to the skin, that might be beneficial. But herbs internally, a good regimen of herbal therapy, really optimizing your cellular health. And yeah, try the dragon's blood. I think it's worth trying.
All right, thank you for that. All right, next question, mold. Mold comes up all the time, and I've actually done a couple episodes, talked to Dr. Dale Nathan about some of his theories on mold, et cetera, and ways to treat. So the question comes up: treat mold or the Lyme slash Bartonella first? What are your thoughts on treating for mold, and what do you recommend?
Um, well, when you look at Lyme and Bartonella, what you're talking about is reactivation of those microbes that have mostly been dormant in tissues. So your body is stressed, your cells are stressed right from there. So you're going to be much more vulnerable to mold. So you always need to ask the question, why? Why do molds produce mycotoxins? They produce mycotoxins as a defense mechanism against bacteria, which is their arch enemy. Bacteria constantly are trying to eat mold, so they're producing mycotoxins. So mycotoxins are really ubiquitous in the environment. They're everywhere. And we're all exposed. And what the mycotoxins do is basically destroy the bacteria's cell membrane. They're cell killers. So our cells are bigger and more complex, so we can take a certain amount of mycotoxins in our food and breathing them. And if our cells are healthy, we do okay with that. But If your cells are stressed by chronic stress, microbe reactivation, all of the things we talk about, your cells are weak, they're more vulnerable to mycotoxins. So they're more damaging. You make that observation that you have somebody who has chronic Lyme and they're in a moldy environment and they're really sick and they're attributing it to the Lyme. They're living with people that are just fine. It doesn't bother them a bit because they don't have that extra stress from the microbes. And you also become sensitized, your immune system becomes sensitized, but so that causes kind of an allergic reaction too. So that's a factor, but a lot of it is that cellular stress. So story, my previous career was obstetrics, and what got me into trouble was doing night call and not sleeping, and that finally made me sick. I had to stop obstetrics, but I had to work. So I started a primary care practice. There weren't any buildings in town. So I ended up buying this 50-year-old building, moved in, got set up. It was full of mold, crawl spaces, everything. And boy, that just sent my recovery down even further. I recovered. I was in that office for 10 years and I recovered in that building and got my health back despite the mold. So I did it by doing everything that I could outside of that. I improved my diet. I worked on my sleep. I took the herbs in high quantities to suppress that microbe stress. But at the same time, I was decreasing my exposure to the mycotoxins. We would run ozone generators on the weekends to knock down what was in the air, really high quality air filters, essential oil diffusers. So decreasing my exposure as much as I possibly could. And as my health got better, I was more resistant to the mold. Or to the mycotoxins. And so, some mycotoxins are worse than others, but so I think that's a big part of it is decreasing your exposure to the mycotoxins is really an important part of recovery. But a lot of times people get trapped that they're stuck in a place that they can't get out of. It's not like, oh, well, this house isn't any good. I'm just go get another one down the street that isn't so bad. It's not like that. So do whatever you can. Start taking the herbs, start improving your cellular health with all the things we talked about in that previous podcast. Do that. It's really, really important.
I want to ask you another question that came in. We didn't really talk about this much on the first show, but neuro Lyme, as you mentioned, the spirochetes are searching for somewhere to sit, and I've spoken to so many people. Dr. Rawls, again, we're talking to Dr. Bill Rawls, the author of the Cellular Wellness Solution and a lot of other great things. A lot of people with neuro Lyme, where the bacteria gets into the brain or the parasites, if you will. Question came in which said, do herbs cross the blood-brain barrier? So talk a second or two, if you can, about herbal treatment for it's funny, I've spoken to some people who have had no neurological problems at all. And I've spoken to people, some that I've spoken to very closely, that there was obviously that the bacteria and the parasites have gotten in the brain. Talk about that.
All right. Yeah, neuro Lyme, some people get it, some people don't. And, when definitely it's a bacterial effect. And back to the herb question, a lot more chemicals cross the blood-brain barrier into the brain than don't, quite frankly. So most of the things that you're taking in an herb will cross into the brain and they do have an effect. But as far as what's going on here, it's, I think, a lot more complicated than people are really appreciating. In that, one way they try to explain is to say, well, certain strains of Borrelia, like the European strains of Borrelia, which are present now, and our strains are there, and they've found them all over the place. So maybe the different strains have a higher tendency to invade the neurological system. I mean, it's all about eating. It's what they want to eat. And, Borrelia uses collagen. It uses myelin from the coat around our nerves. Bartonella, it eats red blood cells, so everything has to eat and they have different food. Um, so what we're having, the neurological symptoms are from cellular damage from these microbes invading the cells, invading or scavenging myelin and other parts of the cell, and that causes cellular distress, and we get symptoms from it. But here's the deal. I've found evidence that's pretty convincing that we actually have a microbiome of the brain, that all during our lifetime, microbes are trickling from the gut, from our skin, from our sinuses, from our gums into our bloodstream and ending up in our brain. And some of them are crossing directly from our sinuses into our brain. There were some good autopsy studies finding hundreds of species of microbes inside brains of every person they checked. And they came from those places, from the gut, from the skin. It was more from inside of us than outside of us. So this idea that our tissues are sterile is bogus. It's more like our bloodstream and our tissues are more like a freeway of things coming and going all the time. So we end up with things in our tissues. Some of them may actually be beneficial. That's where we don't know yet. But I don't think it's just Borrelia. When you have this microbe reactivation and this frenzy of microbes, it's not just the few things you picked up from a tick. It's things that it's mycoplasmas and chlamydias and Epstein-Barr and dozens of viruses and on and on and on, plus the things that have crossed over from other parts in your body, and they end up in your tissues. So I think it is a spectrum of microbes, and we know microbes work together. It's things working together. And so we don't know all the dynamics of that yet, which I think is another big reason why using a comprehensive regimen of herbs is so important, because you're covering so many more bases than just 2 or 3 microbes. And that's why it's so important. And that's why we see people gradually improve with the neurological symptoms. And then you look at other illnesses like MS and you find Borrelia, it's there, and all these other things, but also chlamydias and mycoplasmas and Epstein-Barr. And, you start to see all these connections, and all the diagnoses start to run together, and you start seeing basically the same mechanisms.
Yeah, a great answer there. So much there to think about. I want to talk. I want to read this question exactly how it came through. It's basically on the whole concept of congenital transmission of Lyme. Please ask Dr. Rawls what herbs can safely be used while trying to conceive during pregnancy, breastfeeding, to prevent congenital transmission of Lyme and
Yeah.
co-infections.
Yeah, I think a lot of doctors would say, "Oh, it doesn't transfer through the uterus or placenta." That was another finding that there are many researchers that have suggested or found that we actually have a microbiome of the placenta, so where a mother is actually transferring microbes to the unborn baby well before the child is actually delivered. So that kid is developing that microbiome even in utero, and things get across. Now, different microbes. When you look at spreading from host to host, that's what microbes do. And Borrelia specializes in that transmission through ticks. Whereas you look at another spirochete, syphilis, it specializes in the sexually transmitted route. So you're much more likely to get congenital syphilis than you are congenital Lyme disease, but it still occurs. So when they've looked at semen and vaginal fluids, they found in people who are, very symptomatic with Lyme disease, the concentration of the bacteria there is very low. So it's just pathways, but it still happens, and they're definitely documented cases. Most of the herbs, and here I'm not in a position to just recite all of them, but most of your herbs are very favorable. I mean, you have to accept that the herbs are things that humans have been using for hundreds of years or even thousands of years. So these are things that we inherently have found to be safe, that mesh well for our biochemistry. So compared to the drugs, they have a much, much lower potential for harm. So there's definitely a spectrum of herbs that can be used. Just going down the list in my book, you'll find that we've looked at the majority of those and found that they are safe for breastfeeding or use in pregnancy in various stages. It's always good to do your research ahead of time before you take something, but it's a matter of balancing risk. Taking anything, drug, herb, or anything, there may be a small risk. But then you look at the risk of passing that to your child, that's some pretty significant risk too. And it's a balance of risk whether you make that decision to use those things in pregnancy. But the herbs have a lot better track record than the drugs do.
Yeah. All right. Again, we're talking to Dr. Bill Rawls with a little special episode here. Let's see. I'm just going to take one or two more here that we got. Methylene blue. A couple people asked if you have any opinions on that.
Um, I like the herbs better. I'll
Mhm.
tell you that right up front. Methylene blue is an old, old drug. It's considered the first synthetic drug. It's the first one that somebody actually synthesized. Came from a natural source, but it was changed as they modified that chemical. And it was used it's been used for a wide variety of things. So the blue color, we use it in medicine. Like sometimes we want to stain something so we can see a mole and help remove that mole compared to the normal tissue. We used to use it in surgery. If we were concerned that we might have nicked somebody's ureter, we would give them IV methylene blue and it would come out in the abdomen so we could see it. Because it would turn the urine blue. And it's used in pathology, but it also does have some antimicrobial properties and it has some cell protective properties. They found that it protects mitochondria, so it does have some good attributes, but it is an agent. It's a foreign substance to our body, so it does have side effects. It can cause nausea and a wide range of other side effects. So it does have some cellular toxicity also and concerns about possible use with other kinds of drugs. So yeah, it has a wide range of uses. It does have antimicrobial properties, but as we talked about, it is a single chemical agent, not the full defense system of a plant. So that has been documented that with long-term use, it can disrupt flora in the gut and it can result in resistant pathogens. So it's not perfect. I always put herbs first out there because the herbs have such wonderful attributes. They have such a wonderful track record. We've used them for several decades now for chronic Lyme with exceptionally good results. And it's kind of like do that first. And if that's not quite getting you there, or you want to add a little boost and you like to have blue, then use a methylene blue. Sure. Compared to a lot of the other antibiotics and other drugs out there, it's one of the more favorable.
All right, we got time for one more question here. What's the SOT therapy? Do you have any thoughts on? Can you explain what that is, and do you have any thoughts on it?
Oligonucleotide therapy, selective oligonucleotide therapy, what they're doing is basically targeting specific cells or specific bacteria. And it is Borrelia specific, Bartonella specific, whatever. It's found to have some really good uses in cancer therapy, and I think it's a developing technology that may be very valuable. It's starting to be used in chronic Lyme, but it's just targeting a microbe, not this reactivation. And it gets to that, what everybody sees as Lyme disease is this aggressive pathogen, this single bacteria that's making us sick. And it's your body isn't controlling the microbe, and it's never just Borrelia. It's a wide range of a lot of other things. And so SOT therapy is doing nothing to reduce cellular stress, which is the real underlying problem. Nothing to reduce cellular stress, zero. All it's doing is killing targeted microbes. And if you're targeting one microbe, you're not going to solve the problem. So, yeah, it's very expensive. It requires a lot of time. And, compared to other things, I think it's another one of those therapies that misses the mark, that doesn't solve the problem completely if you truly understand the problem.
All right, once again, I want to thank Dr. Rawls, Dr. Bill Rawls. Again, pick up the book, The Cellular Wellness Solution. You can find Dr. Rawls in many, many places. I just want to acknowledge you again for being on 2 episodes here of the Love, Hope, Lyme podcast.
Pleasure.
Maybe we could do it again because you seem to have great answers for all the questions that we have. And I want to thank you also for really giving me a good explanation on the role of verbs. Typically when you think of medicine, you think of the way you were describing antibiotics or some of the other types of medicines, if you will, that would go directly with a single purpose, right? And its single purpose is one particular thing. I love the way you explained how the herbal approach really puts you on the pathway to cellular health. And I want to tell people as well, you go to the book because it's not just about the herbs, it's about healthy living. Right. One thing I wanted to talk to you, maybe we'll do another episode on the concept of sleep. You kind of alluded to that when you were in med school and how not getting proper sleep actually led to some challenges for you. I heard a Lyme doctor at the ILADS conference say, if you can figure out sleep, you can take care of all your chronic illness. I know it's more complicated than that, but you talk about nutrition, you talk about all the well-being, and then avoiding putting yourself in the position where the stressors would allow the stealthy pathogens to come out. So I want to thank Dr. Rawls. Do you any final things you want to say briefly?
Well,
Just to
just
kind of
on
wrap
that
up?
note, yeah, I think it's really important that, I've talked to so many people that have said, I've done this therapy and I have all these symptoms and I feel terrible, and should I go out and spend all this money on this other therapy? And we go through and I find that, hey, you're only sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night. And if we don't fix that, none of those therapies are going to do anything for you. But the thing that helped my sleep the very, very most was taking the herbs, reducing the microbe frenzy, restoring my cellular health, which calmed that sympathetic overload. That's the thing that worked. So I think it's really important to solve the problem, not treat the symptom.
Yeah. And you go through that very, very well in the book and in all the work that you do. Once again, I would tell people, if you're watching this on YouTube, go up, give us a thumbs up, give us a comment. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please give us a 5-star review. Once again, my name is Fred Diamond. Thanks, Dr. Rawls. This is the Love, Hope, Lyme podcast.